The Montana sun beat down on the cracked concrete of Fort Clay, baking the air until it smelled like dust and dried grass. Sergeant Clara Jensen wiped a layer of sweat from her brow, her camouflage uniform already dark with moisture. She was 28, built like a runner, and carried the quiet, steady competence of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. But in the 3rd platoon, that only made her a target. "Look at Storm still counting her crayons," Staff Sergeant Miller sneered, leaning against a Humvee. Miller was a big man, heavy in the shoulders, and he liked loud, simple solutions. He didn't like Clara's methods, which often favored negotiation and non-lethal engagement over brute force. He called her Storm only because he hoped her calm demeanor would break. "It's a training exercise, Miller," Clara replied, her voice even. "The objective is not a kill count. It's managing a volatile civilian population and neutralizing the threat with minimum collateral damage. We go in too hot, we lose the town, and we lose the support. The town is plywood and paint, Jensen. The civilians are college kids who need money for beer. They're playing insurgents and displaced, and they're doing a terrible job of it. This isn't the sand pit. This is Montana. We're supposed to practice overwhelming force, not serve tea and empathy." His words were designed to sting, delivered with a slow, deliberate mockery that made the other men chuckle uncomfortably. Clara simply fastened the strap of her combat vest, the hard knot of worry in her stomach having nothing to do with Miller's insults. She was worried about the briefing. Operation Iron Eagle was supposed to simulate a domestic extremist uprising in a fictionalized American town called Willow Creek, built specifically for training on the vast, lonely expanse of Fort Clay. The intelligence reports for the simulation had been unusually dark, mentioning highly trained cells and unexpected, almost unnerving levels of zeal from the role players. Just then, the platoon leader, Captain Elias, hurried over, his face tight. "Listen up, 3rd, we have an unscripted element. An element we did not prepare for." A heavy silence fell over the team. Captain Elias continued, his voice low. "A van, believed to be connected to a real anti-government cell operating in the area, breached the northern perimeter last night. We caught the driver, a local nutjob, but the transport was empty. However, we found evidence they dropped off a package," Miller snorted. "A package, sir? Like a bomb?" "Worse, Miller. The intelligence suggests it's not actors. It's not college kids. It's 5, possibly 6 juvenile combatants. Foreign, highly radicalized, and potentially trafficked. They were likely smuggled into the country and dropped here, right into the middle of our simulated town, possibly believing they are already in an active combat zone in their homeland." The casual chatter stopped entirely. The idea of real foreign combatants, children, hidden inside their plywood battlefield, was horrifying. Clara felt a chill, her professional training instantly kicking in, replacing the worry with a sharp tactical focus. "Captain, the training rules are out the window. If they are children, we prioritize extraction and non-lethal incapacitation. They aren't terrorists. They're victims." Miller finally stopped leaning and stood straight up, his eyes wide. "Victims? Sir, if they're radicalized, they're booby traps. They're threats. We take them out before they take us out. This is a live-fire threat now." Captain Elias hesitated, looking from Miller's aggressive, hard face to Clara's calm, analytical expression. He was a good leader, but hated difficult choices. Sergeant Jensen is right. Non-lethal is the immediate priority, but every man and woman here must treat them as armed and dangerous. This is a hostage extraction and neutralization operation now. Get ready. We move in 5. As the team moved to load up, Miller stopped beside Clara. He didn't sneer this time, but his voice was full of contempt. "You and your soft methods, Jensen. This is where you freeze. When you see a child with a grenade, you won't talk your way out of it. You'll be a liability." Clara looked him straight in the eye, the sun glinting off the polished glass of her protective lenses. "I won't freeze, Staff Sergeant, but I won't murder a victim in a panic either. That's the difference between a soldier and a butcher." The silence that followed was heavy with mutual hostility. Clara checked her sidearm, feeling the heavy weight of the mission, a weight far heavier than any she had anticipated for a simple training exercise in Montana. She was no longer facing cardboard cutouts. She was facing a tragic reality, and her mettle was about to be tested like never before. The transport vehicle carrying Clara's team, a heavy armored personnel carrier, ground to a halt just outside the fake perimeter of Willow Creek. The town was unsettlingly quiet. The plywood storefronts, a mock bank, a dusty barber shop, and a small library stood silent under the harsh sun. The normal din of the college student role players, the shouts, the staged riots, the fake gunfire, was gone. The silence amplified the fact that this was no longer a game. Clara was the first one out, moving quickly to secure the intersection. Captain Elias had given her the point, knowing she was the steadiest under pressure despite Miller's constant complaints. "All right, slow and low," Clara whispered into her comms unit. "Miller, you cover the main alley. Thompson, check the library." They moved like ghosts, their boots crunching softly on the fine gravel. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat. After 5 minutes of tense, creeping progress, they heard a noise. Not a shout, not a staged gunshot, but a soft, almost metallic scraping sound coming from inside the mock barber shop. Miller tensed, raising his rifle. Target sighted. Gonna breach and clear. They're kids, right? It'll be fast. "Hold, Miller," Clara ordered, her voice a low growl. "We don't know what they're carrying or how they've set up. You go in aggressive. You give them a reason to use whatever they have. Wait for my signal." Clara crept closer to the barbershop window. The glass was smeared with fake dirt for the simulation, but she managed to get a clear view through a small gap. The scene inside was heartbreaking. A boy, no older than 12, was hunched in the corner. He was tiny, clad in clothes that were too big and too dirty, his face a mosaic of dust and fear. He wasn't a college student playing a role. The terror in his eyes was too raw. He held a small, dark object that Clara couldn't quite identify. It looked like a crudely fashioned weapon, maybe a pipe bomb or a modified piece of military ordnance. It was definitely real. He was trembling violently, his breath catching in ragged, silent sobs. The scraping sound was him trying to dig a small trench in the dirt floor with a piece of broken metal, a fighting position, a burial, or just a desperate act of fear. Clara's heart pounded. But her mind was cold and clear. She saw the genuine panic in the child's stance. He wasn't calculating. He was reacting based on deeply ingrained, traumatic programming. He wasn't thinking of killing. He was thinking of surviving. "He's a juvenile, Captain," Clara reported, keeping her voice neutral for the comms unit. "He is armed, but his posture is defensive, not offensive. He's terrified. I advise a soft approach." "Soft approach?" Miller's voice crackled, full of disbelief. "He's got a weapon, Storm. What if it's a suicide vest?" "He's a combatant. We have to neutralize." Captain Elias, listening from a safe distance, sounded stressed. "Miller, stand down. Sergeant Jensen, you have the field. Do not engage lethally unless absolutely forced. How do you plan to proceed?" Clara took a deep, centering breath. "I'm going to approach the window and use the standard negotiation protocol. I will try to open a line of communication. He needs to see a non-threatening face." Before Clara could move, Miller, fueled by impatience and distrust, ignored the captain's order. He broke cover, shouting an aggressive, generic challenge that was meant to startle, not soothe. "Soldier! Drop your weapon, now!" The boy in the barbershop, hearing the shout in a language he likely didn't understand, didn't drop his weapon. Instead, he lunged to the side, his small body hitting the wall with a sickening thud, and he let out a short, choked-off scream. In his terror, his finger convulsed, and the small, crude device in his hand clattered to the dirt. It wasn't a bomb, but a radio transceiver, modified to look lethal, used for coordination. But the shock of the sound of a large man yelling had sent him spiraling into instinctual self-defense. Miller had almost shot him. The boy was now curled in a ball, sobbing uncontrollably. Clara glared at Miller, her eyes burning with professional anger. "You just jeopardized the entire mission, Staff Sergeant. You almost turned a scared child into a martyr. Get back to cover." Miller, shocked by the sheer vulnerability of the boy, but too proud to admit his mistake, simply retreated with a frustrated grunt. The brief glimpse of a child's raw terror had been enough to break his bravado, but not enough to change his mind about Clara's softness. The boy was still armed, still a threat, and still needed to be dealt with. The contact point had been made, but the true challenge, reaching the child beneath the soldier, had only just begun. The situation had devolved from tense standoff to emotional crisis. The boy, Elias, was still curled up in the corner of the barber shop, crying hard, his entire body shaking. His fear was infectious, spreading a cold, hard silence across the team. Clara knew this was the critical moment. If they waited, if they called in specialists, the other 4 or 5 children hidden in the town might mobilize, believing Elias had been captured or killed. The clock was ticking. "Captain Elias, I'm moving to the window," Clara announced over the comms. "I'm dropping my rifle and my sidearm into the dirt. I need non-lethal cover and absolute silence from everyone. I need Miller to stand down and hold his position." Captain Elias hesitated. "Sergeant Jensen, you are exposing yourself to an unknown threat. That is an order not to proceed." "Wait for my permission." "Sir, with all respect, waiting is the hostile action here," Clara countered, her voice calm but firm. His reaction to Miller proves he's not seeking combat. He's seeking cover. The moment we hesitate, he'll try to run, or he'll try to fight. I'm going in before he processes what just happened. Before the captain could officially deny her, Clara slid her rifle onto the gravel and carefully unholstered her sidearm, pushing both a good 10 feet away from her body with her foot. She kept only a small sealed water bottle and a nutrition bar in her vest pocket. She then stood up slowly, her hands clearly visible. Miller, watching from the alley, swore under his breath. She's losing it. She's going to get herself killed trying to play social worker. Clara ignored them all. She approached the barbershop window, tapping lightly on the grimy glass. When Elias flinched, she spoke softly in Arabic, the language of the region the intelligence suggested these children came from. "Peace, little brother. I'm not here to hurt you. I am here to help. We are friends." Elias looked up, his eyes bloodshot, framed by long, dusty lashes. He didn't respond to the words, but he registered the tone. It was a woman's voice, quiet, and without the sharp edge of command he was used to hearing. Just then, a sound ripped through the quiet street, a loud, sharp snap and a dull, heavy thud. It came from the mock library where Thompson was holding cover. A cloud of black smoke immediately billowed out of the library's back entrance, carrying the sharp, metallic smell of a fragmentation grenade, a real one. Thompson yelled in pain over the comms, followed by static. "Captain, I'm hit!" "He's got real ordnance." "They're not waiting!" The mask was broken. The simulation was fully, irrevocably real. Captain Elias's voice was sharp with terror and shock. "Lethal force authorized! Lethal force authorized! Clear the sector, neutralize the threat." His command was pure, unadulterated panic. The sudden reality of the situation, a real casualty, real explosives, had shattered his composure. Miller and the remaining troops immediately began to move, preparing to storm the town with live rounds. This was exactly what Clara needed to prevent. If they started shooting, the children, already trained to die for their cause, would fight back until the last one fell. Turning Willow Creek into a bloodbath, Clara, without hesitation, ignored the captain's panicked order. She placed her hands flat against the window. Elias, the small boy, was watching her, his eyes wide and unblinking, waiting for her to make the first move. "Miller, you hold!" Clara commanded, her voice cutting through the panic on the comms, cold and hard as steel. "You follow my orders, not the captain's. We still have non-lethal options, and I'm taking them. You fire, and I'll have you up for murder, not combat." "Do you hear me?" Miller hesitated. Clara's sudden, raw authority, the sound of her voice cutting cleanly through the captain's panicked static, was more potent than any shout. He hated her, but he couldn't deny her clarity. She was the only clear voice left in the chaos. Clara turned her attention back to Elias. She reached slowly into her vest pocket and pulled out the sealed water bottle. She had just a few minutes before the rest of the children reacted to the grenade explosion, and she was going to use every second. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, fear, and imminent violence. Clara knew that every single combat instinct the boy, Elias, had ever been taught was screaming at him to run or fight. Yet he stayed frozen, his eyes locked on her. Clara took a deliberate step back from the window and crouched low, making herself small and non-threatening. She uncapped the water bottle slowly, watching Elias's parched lips. She then placed the bottle on the ground just outside the door and slid it gently across the dirt until it rested a few feet from the entrance. She didn't speak in Arabic this time. She used a universal language of need. She pointed at the water, then to her own mouth, and then made a gesture of offering, opening her hands. Elias's eyes followed the bottle. He was torn between deep-seated suspicion and agonizing thirst. After a moment that felt like an hour, he shuffled forward, his movements jerky and cautious. He snatched the water, retreating quickly into the shadows of the barber shop. He didn't look at her, but she heard the choked sound of him gulping down the water. Clara spoke again, her voice like a soft murmur, relying on simple, recognizable words mixed with Arabic. "Good water, you are safe. You are a victim. I am a mother. I am not like the others." She knew the claim of motherhood was a gamble, but she was counting on the deep-rooted cultural respect for women in that role to cut through the combat training. She then pulled out the nutrition bar, a basic, foil-wrapped protein bar, and repeated the slow, deliberate offering. Elias took that too without looking at her and started tearing at the wrapper with shaking fingers. The rest of them, "The other boys," Clara said softly, switching back to English but using a tone of deep, sincere concern. "They need to know you are safe. They need to stop fighting." "We want no more fighting, little one." She knew she needed a name. A name was an anchor to humanity. "My name is Clara," she said, touching her chest. "What is your name?" "Give me your name, and I can help you." Elias looked up this time. He squinted at her, his expression a mix of confusion, exhaustion, and lingering hostility. He saw the genuine vulnerability in her stance, unarmed, crouched, offering food and water instead of bullets. She wasn't just playing the part of a caregiver. She was being one. "It doesn't matter what his name is, Storm." Miller's voice, harsh and impatient, finally broke through the tense calm. He was tired of waiting for the drama to end. "This is taking too long." "The team is ready to move. We need to clear the sector before they find a way to escape." Miller took a single aggressive step out from the alley, raising his rifle again, preparing to make a move around the shop. His movement shattered the fragile trust Clara had built. Elias, mistaking Miller's aggressive silhouette and raised weapon for an immediate attack on Clara, reacted instantly. He didn't run. He lunged back to the wall, reached for a makeshift pocket in his oversized trousers, and pulled out a small, heavy stone, throwing it with surprising speed and accuracy toward Miller's head. The stone struck Miller's helmet with a loud thwack, making the heavy man stumble and curse loudly. In that half-second of distraction, Elias shouted something at Clara in his native language. He stood up, small, thin, and defiant, looking at Clara with eyes that had seen too much war. His voice, though still childish, was filled with a desperate, ancient understanding. Then, Clara heard it, spoken in broken, heavily accented English, the words cutting right through the smoke-filled air. "You're like my father now." The words hung there, shocking the listening troops on the comms, and hitting Clara with the force of a physical blow. The child didn't mean his biological father. He meant the father figure who had provided him food, protection, and a reason to live in a world of violence. To Elias, that authority, that provider, was the one who didn't shoot and who stood against the one who did shoot, Miller. The profound, tragic misunderstanding of the world that statement carried, that kindness equals control, that the first person to show empathy holds a life-or-death power, was devastating. Clara knew she couldn't fail him now. The words, "You're like my father now," changed everything. Elias wasn't surrendering to an enemy soldier. He was pledging loyalty to a protector, and that meant he was now, in his mind, her responsibility and her tool. Clara swallowed hard, fighting back the rush of emotion. She had to use this horrifying, tragic bond. "Elias," she said, using the name she had inferred from the intelligence reports, trying to make the sound of it comforting. "You must help me." The others. "We must stop the fighting or they will kill them." "Your friends," Elias, responding to the tone and the perceived bond, pointed a trembling finger toward a dilapidated storage shed behind the barber shop. "Others," Not friends, just men with guns. They want us to fight. Clara instantly realized the implication. The children were not the primary combatants. They were a diversion and a shield for the domestic extremists who had smuggled them in and were now using the confusion of the live exercise to carry out a larger, darker plan on the actual military base property. Before she could process this new information, Miller moved. Driven by frustration, rage over the stone hit, and the captain's panicked, lethal order, he charged out of the alley toward the barbershop door, rifle raised. "That's enough theater, Jensen. Get clear. I'm going in to secure the asset." Elias, seeing his protector threatened by the aggressor, let out a high, distressed shout and raised his hands, preparing to throw another small rock at Miller. Clara saw the flash of movement. She knew what Miller would see: an armed, aggressive child combatant. He would pull the trigger without hesitation, fulfilling his own tragic prophecy. Clara didn't think. She lunged, diving forward in front of the barbershop entrance, slamming her body against the door just as Miller rounded the corner. Bang! The shot was deafening, the report echoing through the plywood town. Miller had fired, but not at Elias. He had been aiming for Elias. But Clara's sudden movement had forced him to redirect instinctually. And the bullet tore into the doorframe just inches from her head. "What in God's name, Jensen?" Miller roared, his face contorted in shock and fury. Clara didn't move. She lay spread-eagled, shielding the boy who was now hiding behind her legs, clutching her uniform. "I am securing the asset, Staff Sergeant," she said, her voice strained, but absolutely level. "And I am stopping you from murdering a child. The threat is not the boy. The threat is in the storage shed. Elias just told me. There are armed adults there, using these kids as cover to get on base." The sheer audacity of her action, physically interposing herself between a heavily armed soldier and a child combatant, froze Miller completely. He lowered his rifle, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. The captain, listening in horror over the comms, finally found his voice. "Miller, stand down! All units, cease fire! Focus all attention on the storage shed, grid 6-2 Alpha. Sergeant Jensen, report." Clara slowly pushed herself up, wincing from the impact of hitting the ground. Elias was still holding onto her uniform, his face pressed against the rough fabric. She looked at Miller, who looked like he had just aged 10 years. The raw realization of what he had almost done visible in his wide, pale eyes. "Captain," Clara reported, looking down at the small, terrified boy clinging to her. "Elias is secured. He is non-lethal and providing actionable intelligence. Requesting medical teams for the injured child and extraction of the remaining 4 juveniles once the actual threat in the shed is neutralized." She gently touched Elias's shoulder. He looked up at her, his eyes still wary, but the fear had been replaced by a nascent trust. "It is finished, little brother," she whispered. "You are safe." Miller watched the exchange, his chest heaving. The scorn was gone, replaced by a devastating, reluctant respect. He had called her soft, and she had shown an unimaginable strength. The strength to risk her life, not in a fight, but to prevent one. In the end, Clara's gamble paid off. Following Elias's broken, terrified whispers, the remaining U.S. troops, led by a now sobered and fiercely focused Miller, neutralized the 2 domestic extremists hiding in the storage shed. The extremists had planned to use the chaos of the child soldiers to set up a larger chemical attack on a nearby facility, proving Clara's intelligence correct. The remaining 4 children were located, terrified but unharmed, and quickly secured by the military police. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Captain Elias, still shaken, initially tried to cover his mistake. Citing Clara for insubordination, a direct order had been defied, regardless of the outcome. 2 weeks later, Clara stood before a formal review board at the base command center. The air conditioning was freezing, and the atmosphere was glacial. The general, a stern-faced woman named Albright, looked down at her over a stack of reports. The one detailed Clara's act of defiance. "Sergeant Jensen," General Albright said, her voice a low, hard rumble. "You defied a direct live-fire command from your captain. You put yourself and your teammate at risk. The fact that the outcome was positive does not negate the fact that you unilaterally changed the rules of engagement. Clara stood at attention. General, with respect, the captain's order was based on panic, not tactics. The original mission priority was minimum collateral damage, which includes the extraction of juvenile combatants. When the captain lost control, I had a choice. Follow a panicked, lethal order and initiate a massacre, or follow my training and the true mission objective. I chose the objective. Miller, surprisingly, was the next person to speak. He had been called as a witness to the insubordination. But his testimony was not what anyone expected. "General, I was the one who was ready to fire," Miller stated, his voice stripped of all contempt and arrogance. "I called Sergeant Jensen soft. I mocked her for her non-lethal training. But when the grenade went off and the captain panicked, Sergeant Jensen was the only one who saw the difference between a threat and a victim. She put her life on the line to stop me from making a mistake that would have ruined my life and stained this platoon forever." He looked at Clara, not with warmth, but with a deep, crushing humility. She was right. I was wrong. She is the only reason those 5 children are alive, and the only reason the real enemy was exposed before they could do real damage. If you discipline her for that, you're sending the wrong message to every soldier here about what courage really is. General Albright stared at the silence that followed. The facts were undeniable. The 5 children were safe, the extremists were captured, and the only person to show true tactical control was the one who had disobeyed an order. The twist came a week later. Clara was not promoted, nor was she disciplined. Instead, Captain Elias was reassigned to a desk job, and Miller was placed under Clara for special retraining, a fate worse than a demotion for the proud man, but one he accepted without complaint. The true resolution, however, came from outside the military walls. Due to the successful, non-lethal outcome, the story of the trafficked child soldiers and the domestic extremists was exposed to the U.S. media. It was a scandal, revealing the horrifying practice of using children as sacrificial shields on American soil. The general public finally saw the depth of the sacrifice the U.S. soldiers made, not just in fighting, but in restraint. Clara's redemption wasn't a medal, but the moment she saw Elias again a few weeks later at a secure facility. He was playing with a ball clean and calm, and he recognized her immediately. He didn't speak English well, but he walked right up to her, took her hand, and bowed his head slightly. "Shukran, Ummi," he whispered, using the Arabic word for "thank you, mother." Clara looked down at the boy, then at her own calloused hand, realizing the profound honor of the title she had earned. She had not sought justice or revenge, but by simply holding the line of her own conviction, she had earned the highest respect, the respect of a life saved and the truth exposed to the world. She had shown everyone, especially Staff Sergeant Miller, that the greatest strength in combat is often found not in the size of the gun, but in the certainty of the heart.